Welcome back to the U.S. Navy History Podcast. I am your host, the Captain Dale, and I am joined by the other host, the XO Christoph. Hey, XO Christoph.
Hey, Captain Dale. Good to see you again.
All right, so we're going to get back at it. We're kind of in the between regions of major conflicts. You know, the next real major one coming up is like World War II. No, World War One. Sorry, World War One.
I hear that's the Great War.
Yeah, so we got quite a bit between those. So, you know, we got a few more episodes before we get to the Great War. So, you ready to get underway?
Yes, sir. Let's do it.
All right, so the first thing we're going to talk about today is the United States expedition to Korea.
Okay.
This is 1870. This is the Americans' first foray into Korea. And not the last.
Oh, certainly not.
All right, so the U.S. sends an expedition into Korea. This expedition consisted of about 650 men, over 500 sailors and 100 Marines.
Wow.
Consisting of 5 warships. The USS Colorado, the USS Alaska, the USS Palos, the USS Monocacy, the USS Benicia. Now, the Colorado had Rear Admiral John Rogers and Frederick F. Lowe, who was the ambassador to China.
Okay.
Now, on the Korean side, they were known as Tiger Hunters, and they were led by General Yo Jae-yong. Probably completely destroyed it, but you know what? He can't complain because he's not here anymore.
That's why I like to mispronounce all formerly alive people. Not that I'm saying you did, but I'm just saying I enjoy it.
So the Americans, they made safe contact with the Korean inhabitants, described as people wearing white clothes.
That's a weird descriptor, but I suppose accurate.
Yeah. Now, they did ask them about the SS General Sherman incident, which was the destruction of an armed merchant marine sidewheel steamer that visited them in 1866. These guys were not very happy to discuss this topic.
I could see that.
You know, they've been trying to avoid having to pay out for that incident.
Yeah, it's like, hey, can we just move on? That's in the past. Let's not worry about that. It's like, no. We need to make this right.
Yeah. You know, the Americans, they let the Koreans know that their fleet is going to be exploring the area and that they mean no harm.
Okay. I mean, that's a good thing to say. But if you meant harm, that's what you would say, too, until you were able to sneak into the range that you were wanting to be at. So I know Korea has a very complicated history with China and Japan, and they're probably always on guard, and that did not comfort them at all. That's what I'm predicting.
Yeah. Now, Korean policy at this time prohibited foreign ships from sailing on the Han River because it led directly to the capital of Hanyang, which is modern-day Seoul.
I see. I didn't know that.
Yes. So on June 1st, the Korean fortress fired at the U.S. fleet as they sailed up the Ganghwa Straits, which leads to the river.
But they weren't on the river, right?
Not yet.
Okay.
They were heading towards there.
Yeah.
The U.S. forces were not hit very hard because the, quote, bad gunnery of the Koreans, whose fire, although very hot for the 15 minutes in which they maintained it, was ill-directed and consequently without effect.
That's a very seemingly polite way to say that they were awful.
But, back during this time, any correspondence written down is very flowery.
That's right. Huh. It's like they anticipated the Freedom of Information Act. You know what I mean? Like, you can tell that there are some periods where, like, oh, this is never getting out, so I can write whatever I want, and it's very detailed and descriptive and not flattering. But these people, they were like, how can I put this in the best light while still conveying the truth? Let me do that. And now when we read it today, it's like, oh, wow, what a nice way to put that.
What a nice way to telling them that you suck.
Right.
So the U.S. demanded an apology within 10 days, and there was no response. So Rogers decided on a punitive assault on the forts. You don't want to apologize? Well, we're going to expletive you up.
Right. Was this seems to be a theme, right? Like all the naval engagements we've seen, firing on a ship. Usually it's like, if you can apologize and say, hey, sorry, and then that is usually the end of it, right? There's not more dire consequences if somebody apologizes. Is that right?
Well, it's usually an apology with a payout for damages.
So either they didn't want to pay damages, or they just refused to say, yeah, we didn't do anything wrong. You were sailing toward our river. This is our domain. That's on you. Okay, well, I'm caught up.
All right, so that leads us to the Battle of Ganghwa. This was June 10th, 1871, where it's described as a light attack by the Americans against the lightly defended Choi garrison on Ganghwa, which is along the Saili River. So the Koreans were armed with severely outdated weapons. They were still using matchlocks.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. At this time, I think, rifling was a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I've possibly even cartridge ammunition now.
Oh, yeah. Like they had lever action stuff in the Civil War. So that's,
Yeah. No, did they?
I'm pretty sure, like toward the end, I think I'll let that be my homework assignment. I don't want to mislead the listener.
I think they did have revolvers, but I don't know about the rifles. Anyway, so the Korean forces are quickly overrun. And so the Americans move on to their next objective, which was the Deokjin garrison.
Okay.
So the Korean forces were kept from effective range for their little matchlocks by American 12-pound howitzers.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that's a big difference.
And so the American troops continued on towards the third objective, which was the fort itself, which they found abandoned.
Yeah, I could see that. As soon as they get there, it's like, yeah, they got some pounding.
They're getting slaughtered by, very unequal weaponry. So I don't blame them whatsoever for being like, no, peace, I'm out.
Right.
The sailors and Marines, they quickly destroyed the fortress and continued to Gwangsong Garrison, which was a citadel. By this time, the Korean forces had regrouped there. So along the way, some Korean units did try to flank the U.S. forces, but were beaten off again due to strategic placement of artillery.
Yeah, the U.S. just went through several years of civil war, so I'm sure they're sharp as far as how to move troops.
Well, in their recent history, they have the Revolutionary War, the Civil War, the War of 1812.
Oh, that's right. So they've had lots of fighting practice.
Yes, they are very, very good at what they do. And especially against, a
ill-supplied
country that,
yeah,
a country that's ill-supplied and, doesn't have modern weaponry.
Mm-hmm.
Nah.
Yeah, that's
good. Not good for the Koreans.
I have a prediction as far as who's going to win, but I'll hold it until the end. Continue.
All right. So artillery fire from the ground forces and the USS Montocry offshore pounded the citadel in preparation for an assault by U.S. forces.
Oof.
A force of 546 sailors and 105 Marines grouped on the hills west of the fortress, keeping cover and returning fire. Once the artillery bombardment stopped, the Americans charged the citadel, led by a guy named Lieutenant Hugh McKee. So I know what they have now. So the slow reloading time of the Korean matchlocks aided the Americans, who were armed with Remington rolling block carbines.
Oh, my. I was going to say, lever action was available in the 1860s. There were both the Spencer repeating rifle and the Henry rifle, both created in 1860 and adopted by soldiers in the Civil War. So it's available, but Remington.
Nice. This weapon was a 50 caliber rifle.
Whoa, wow.
This was also breech loading. It was not lever action.
Yeah.
Still, breech loading versus matchlock loading.
Right.
Very, very different. So the Americans make it over the walls, and the Koreans ended up having to throw rocks at the Americans.
I appreciate that they're not giving up. You know, they're standing for what they believe in and fighting to the bitter end. But that seems like traditionally an unwise decision to throw rocks at a heavily armed force.
So McKee, the lieutenant, he was the first to make it into the citadel proper and was immediately fatally wounded by a shot to his groin.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
That's the unkindest shot of all.
Yeah, he bled out. That's the shot that bleeds you out.
Let's move on. I don't want to dwell on that. I think we can all acknowledge that's the worst potential place to be shot. And I feel bad for the lieutenant.
Okay.
Ugh.
Go ahead and uncross your legs now.
Okay. How did you know?
The guy to take command next is Commander Winfield Scott Skeely. And Skeely shot the Korean soldier who shot McKee. So at least there was a little bit of revenge there.
Yeah. Revenge or justice?
Oh. Well, I mean...
Yeah, we're not necessarily here to opine. Just that we state the facts and let the listener decide.
Yeah.
We'll opine every once in a while, but we don't need to delve into the... Yes, so...
I mean, the Americans are in the wrong in the first place.
I'm not sure. Maybe their diplomacy's rusty. It's like, hey, not a lot of countries like you sailing 5 warships into their waters. Just saying.
That's why they're wrong in the first place.
They don't do that.
So the flag commander of the Koreans is General Yo Jang-yong, who is called Sugae by the Koreans, and was captured by a corporal named Charles Brown of the USS Colorado's Guard and Private Hugh Purvis of the USS Alaska's Guard.
Wow.
Yeah, the general got caught by 2 low-ranking guys.
Nice. I bet they got promoted. That's a promotable, I think, action.
Well, yeah, maybe. But more than likely, the guy that got promoted was Private James Doherty when, he killed the general.
Oh, well, this is going south fast.
You didn't think it was going to go north, did you?
Oh, no. Well, there's always a chance for somebody with a cool head to say, hold on, let's pause and evaluate and communicate. It's like, clearly the Americans are just rolling through.
Not in a punitive action.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Let's continue. See how much punishment gets doled out.
Well, So, a guy named Cryas Hayden, who was the carpenter for the USS Colorado, serving as a color bearer for the crew, planted the U.S. flag on the ramparts under heavy enemy fire. So the corporal and the privates and the carpenter, they all received the Medal of Honor.
Yeah, I bet.
So this whole battle lasted 15 minutes.
Oof.
In the end, 243 Koreans were counted dead.
Ooh.
And 3 Americans were killed. 10 Americans are wounded and 20 Koreans are captured. 5 Korean forts were taken in total.
Whoa. In 15 minutes?
Well, no, not in 15 minutes. This one battle was 15 minutes.
Yeah, I was going to say that. Okay, sorry. That's me jumping to conclusions.
You big jump.
That's why you have me on the pod.
So the U.S. had hoped to use the captives as bargaining chips to meet with local officials, but the Koreans refused, calling the captives cowards.
Oh.
And the Americans were told that they were welcome to keep the wounded prisoners.
Just keep picturing it's like, haha, we have your people. We demand this. And it's like, yeah, keep them. And your bluff has been called, and now it's like you've got that goldfish from the fair. It's like, well, I guess I got to take care of them now.
Yeah. And those things can live, if they're taken care of right, a long time and get very big.
That's right. So I imagine this is a goldfish situation.
So if they feed these people well and treat them well, they're going to grow up to be really big?
Yeah, that's exactly the metaphor I was going for.
Okay.
That and the whole, hey, surprise, you have another liability that is now your responsibility. But I'm not sure what the official stance is with prisoners like that, especially in 1871.
Well, I believe in a lot of these countries like Korea and all of that, if you are captured, you are disavowed.
Yeah, you're disgraced.
Yeah, you're disgraced. You're a coward because you gave up instead of fighting to the death. So we don't want you anymore. Mm-hmm. You are not a person to us, which is BS, but that's the way they felt.
I imagine the shame that those prisoners carried was pretty great. I mean, not only do they know they didn't fight to the death, and they know what their society is going to do to them, but what do they do? Like they're just kind of in this limbo and bearing the weight of their societal expectations.
I mean, it depends really on the person, I would think.
Yeah.
Some guys would be like, oh, well, I can't go home, but hey, I can go make a life somewhere else because I'm still alive.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, during World War II, the Japanese had that type of mindset.
Oh, absolutely.
You know? But, of course, a lot of that was also brainwashing from their government.
Well, I think, yeah, there was a good... I've read a couple of books on that mentality and just the intensity of the Japanese, just societally, and how it kind of fostered these... fanatic isn't the right word, but these super bought-in soldiers, like to the point of that they will give it all the way. Like they'll just go all the way for their country. And yeah, it's... I think it was... what was his name? Blackjack Pershing noted this. I think he was observing the Sino-Japanese War. Or Sino-Russian War, excuse me. And he was like, yeah, the Japanese, they've got... their soldiers are intense.
Well, that's because of the brutality of their basic training.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So... anyway, we'll probably be getting more into that when we hit World War II.
Oh, yeah. But this is a nice kind of preview. I mean, last episode we had an encounter with the Vietnamese, and now the Koreans. It's like, oh, okay, well.
And the Japanese before that.
Yeah. This should have been not a warning, but like a, hey, watch out. Like, please be aware of different cultural norms.
Well, there's not going to happen during this time because of racism.
That's true, yeah.
All right, so let's get into the end of this, shall we?
Okay.
The U.S. was not able to achieve its diplomatic objectives, of course.
Right.
The Koreans, they were like, oh, we're not negotiating. We don't negotiate with terrorists.
Ooh, that stings, but I see where they're coming from.
Yeah. These events led to the regent, Do Won-gun, to actually strengthen his policy of isolation and issue a national proclamation against appeasing foreigners. But in 1876, Korea did establish a trade policy with Japan.
Oh.
Because Japanese decided to do a little bit of gunboat diplomacy of their own.
Yeah, I figured.
They were like, oh, the Americans did this and it worked for them against us. Let's do it against other people.
Well, yeah, and they were very familiar with the Koreans and the resources and what goods they had. And so I'm sure that was, if not China, then Korea then China, just because, yeah, they were definitely wanting what they had.
Yeah. The Japanese did open the door for European countries and the U.S. to establish trade treaties as well. So
that was a good domino effect of sorts.
So in total, 9 sailors and 6 Marines were awarded the Medal of Honor.
Wow.
These were the first awards awarded in a foreign conflict.
Oh, I see. So I guess, yeah, because like the Civil War and the War of 1812 and the Revolutionary War were all on our soil.
Yeah. 2 of them were, well, one of them was purely defensive against the British.
Mm-hmm.
The second one was purely defensive and purely offensive from the same people.
Right.
And then the last one was half and half, trying to stop the British doing their BS.
Yeah.
Out there. So
I could see that. So yeah, that's interesting that this is kind of the first conflict that happens.
April to May in 1982, the U.S. and Korea negotiated and approved a 14-article treaty. This treaty established mutual friendship and assistance in case of an attack. And they also addressed specific matters such as extraterritorial rights for American citizens in Korea.
Oh, wow.
And this also made them the most favored trade status.
Wow. That's pretty good.
Yeah, so that was the expedition to Korea.
I wonder if all those nice benefits would have occurred had we not sailed into their waters. You know what I mean? Did we delay these benefits, or did it actually, in a roundabout way, cause these benefits to happen? You know what I mean?
Well, I mean, this treaty happened after the Japanese went in there with their gunboat diplomacy.
I see.
So more than likely, it would have happened during that time just because of the whole wanting to be protected against the guys that came in here with guns. Even though you guys came in with guns even earlier.
Yeah, but I guess I could say, hey, remember those guys with the guns that really messed us up? They might be able to fight these other guys with guns that are forcing us to trade.
Yeah, and remember, you guys did fire on us first.
Right. And we
were just exploring.
And there was some attempt at diplomacy at least, so I'm sure they recognize that. Maybe.
I don't know. Can't get into their heads.
I'm curious. Whenever something like this happens, I wonder how their schools teach it. You know what I mean? Like, hey, Korea has a long history. This is what happened. Oh, also, in 1871, some Americans showed up and started shooting, or whatever.
Well, Americans showed up and tried to go towards our capital.
Right.
So we stopped them.
Right.
And got trounced.
but we still didn't give in, which I'm sure is a victory of sorts.
All right, so shall we go to the next one?
Yeah.
All right, this is the Egyptian expedition.
I was not expecting, of all the countries, that was one of the... yeah, that's interesting. Let's continue.
This happened in mid-1880, and this was in response to the British and French attack on Alexandria during the Anglo-Egyptian War.
That's right.
So, Rear Admiral James W. Nicholson, commander of the European squadron, was directed to lead the expedition in the screw sloop USS Lancaster. Now, Nicholson arrived at Alexandria on June 27, 1880, to the gunboat USS Nipsic and the corvette USS Quinnebog, arriving July 1st and July 12th, respectively. The British and French fleet under Admiral Beauchamp Seymour began anchoring off Alexandria on May 20th. But they did not start bombarding until July 11th. The Americans were... so bombardment until July 11th, about 100 years before I was born. The Americans were informed by the British of their intentions, so Rear Admiral Nicholson was able to warn the U.S. citizens within the city of the pending bombardment. When the attack began, the British started shooting at the various forts under the command of Colonel Ahmed Orabi. Now, the Egyptians did defend the city pretty well. They struck the British ships several times. But gradually, of course, the fortifications were reduced and silenced over the course of 2 days. During this bombardment, the Americans opened up their ships to all refugees from the city who needed shelter or medical aid. By the 14th, the attack was done, and Alexandria was in a state of anarchy.
Whoa.
And on fire.
Well, oh, yay, all right. I mean, not yay, but I'm going to take a drink anyway.
So remnants of Orabi's rebels and elements of the civilian population were attacking foreign residents, including Americans.
Oh.
So in response to this, Nicholson decides to send a landing party ashore. Captain Henry C. Cochran of the Marine Corps and 2 lieutenants were assigned to command a force of 70 Marines and 57 sailors, with orders to occupy the American consulate, patrol the city, and fight the fires that were ravaging the European section of Alexandria. This landing party was the first contingent of foreign troops to enter the city center after the bombardment. They were later followed by an occupation force of 4,000 Britons.
Wow.
And, of course, other nations threw their people into the lot as well.
Sure, but, yeah.
So by July 20th, conditions in the city had largely improved. So most of the Marines and sailors were withdrawn, except for a small force under Lieutenant Frank L. Denny, which was removed 4 days later, ending the American involvement.
That's interesting. Well,
that's our involvement in Egypt.
Well, I think the nature of our alliance or our support of Britain and France specifically is interesting to see it kind of progress through the centuries. Yeah. So that conflict, when did you say it was? Like 1882, you said?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, that was right after the Suez Canal was finished. So I can see them trying to ensure that their trade... Yeah, if you interrupt trade, you're going to feel pain, unfortunately. And I can see that's why they would have gotten involved.
You know, I've been through the Suez.
No kidding. What's it like?
Sandy.
That's kind of what I thought it would be.
Yes. You had to cover everything and anything where sand could get into the boat or into machinery or... I mean, if the wind's going, it's like having a sand gun on you.
No kidding. Well, I guess I didn't grow up in a desert biome, so that's handy to know.
It's also hot.
Well, yeah, that I also kind of figured that too. But it sure beats sailing around Africa, am I right? Depending on your destination and
depending on the
your origin.
destination. Yeah, and depending on if you're just patrolling as well.
Oh, that's
you may
true.
want to go around the Horn of Africa.
Well, yes, okay. Good points. I know this was a good shortcut, though.
Yeah, we were heading to the Persian Gulf, and we needed to get over there anyway.
Yeah, okay.
Opening shots had already been fired.
That makes sense.
Yep, but down in the machinery room
Ugh.
where I worked, over the air ducting, we had to put fine mesh bags. By the time we left, they were about half filled with sand.
Oh, wow. That is something.
Mm-hmm.
But that's good.
Better in the bags.
Yeah, better in the bags than your machines. Good grief.
Or your lungs.
Ugh, I didn't even think about that. The only experience I have with that, and this is going to sound really kind of lame relative to your story, is I took a Canon mini camera, point and click digital, to the beach once, right? And some sand got in the mechanism to, when you turn it on and off and the lens comes out, and then it didn't work anymore. I was like, oh, I've learned my lesson about sand. But it's not quite the same as, billion-dollar ship.
Yeah, a $30 camera versus a multi-billion-dollar ship.
Whoa. I was like at least $55. I was not, this was...
Oh, this was late 90s?
That's right. Maybe early 2000s. I may have gotten it. Anyway, it was on sale.
Ah, okay. All right. So that's going to bring us to the Bering Sea anti-poaching operations.
Anti-poaching? I am getting more and more astounded at how involved our Navy is in various duties. And so let's talk about this. I'm really curious to see how it unfolds.
This was in 1891 with the U.S. and the UK teamed up.
Okay.
This was versus the Bering Sea poachers.
Okay. I was thinking maybe like Russia, Japan, something like that, but just the Bering Sea poachers. Let's see.
Mm-hmm. So the operations against these poachers, which were poaching seals. This had their origins in the 1880s after British Canada claimed the fishing rights around many of the Aleutian Islands in violation of U.S. law.
Mm-hmm.
So as a result of this, the U.S. Navy Pacific Squadron seized several Canadian ships. Also, the near extinction of the seals by poachers drew the interest of the naturalist societies who pressured the governments to respond. So in 1891, President Benjamin Harrison and his British counterparts banned sealing in the Bering Sea. And ordered the formation of a new naval squadron. This new force was led by American commander Charles S. Cotton and composed of small warships intended to police the disputed fishing zone and inform all merchant ships of the ban.
Interesting.
11 U.S. Navy, Royal Navy, and U.S. Revenue Cutter Services ships participated in the operations. Now, do you remember anything about the U.S. Revenue Cutter Service?
I believe they go on to form the backbone of the Coast Guard. Is that correct?
Yes. Do you remember what they were at this time?
I think they were, I want to say tariff enforcement.
Tax cops.
Yeah.
So the flagship was the USS Marion, which was an old sailing sloop. There also was the steamer USS Thetis, and the gunboats USS Alert and USS Ranger, and the steam-powered revenue cutters, the USRC Corwin and the USRC Rush. The Pacific Coast Steamship Company vessel Alki was also chartered for service and just filled up with Marines. She was placed in command of Captain Henry C. Cochran, who was a Marine. They had their own boat.
Whoa. Is this the only time this happened? I guess that's kind of a deep, it's a broad question. This is interesting because this never traditionally happens.
Well, I mean, they have had their own boats before and after.
Okay.
We'll get more into that later.
Yeah.
More than
hey,
likely.
This isn't the U.S. Marine. Let's settle down.
Well, this is a U.S. Navy history podcast, and the Marines are part of the Navy,
yeah,
so I mean, we could branch out if we wanted to.
Branch out. Nice.
The Alki was also used as a prison ship for captured poachers.
Okay.
Which makes sense. Put them up with Marines.
Yeah, there's a ton of Marines in there to guard them. No problem.
So all of the American ships did have Marine detachments aboard because, that's the fighting force, with the exception of the flagship. So the British naval forces included the cruiser HMS Porpoise, screw sloop HMS Nymph, and the steamer HMS Pheasant.
Can I ask you a question real quick? This is the second time you've said screw sloop. And I assume, so a sloop I understand to be a sailing vessel. But we're in the age of steam power. And is the screw a steam-based propulsion mechanism versus a wind-powered sloop?
Well, back in this time, a lot of these boats had both.
Oh, okay.
Because the fuel needed to drive those steam engines was, you only had enough room to have a certain amount.
Right, that makes sense.
So what typically would happen on long voyages going, say, from the U.S. to the Bering Sea, you would get underway, maneuver and everything like that, and then you put your sails up and shut down your engines.
Gotcha.
And you take the trade winds to where you need to, and then once you get there, sails go down, engines come back online.
Wow, that had to be pretty... The captains, I'm sure, had to be pretty versatile to be able to know how to maneuver the ship in both capacities.
This is the day of learning.
Yeah.
All these new technologies.
That's wild. So, okay, thank you for the explanation.
Oh, you're welcome. So the operations officially began on June 22nd of 1891 when the Alki left for the Bering Sea. Over the course of a few months, the squadron boarded dozens of ships, though only 4 were found to be infringing upon the proclamation of the U.S. and the U.K. These were the schooners E.B. Marvin and Otto, flying British flags, and the schooners La Mafia and Ethel, flying American flags. Probably not, dude.
You saw my face when you said La Mafia.
Yeah.
I was thinking of the Tejano band, not the Sicilian Cosa Nostra, just so you know. Okay.
Mm-hmm. So the Americans miles to Stika. So while the naval ships weren't really fighting anybody, they spent their time practicing. They were running drills and they practiced firing their weapons. The American Marines also conducted expedition drills at Stika and Luluik, which were very entertaining for the inhabitants. In late September, the storm season approached, and the remaining whaling and sealing ships in the Bering Sea left for coastal waters. Because, you really don't want to be on the Bering Sea during storm season.
Oh, no. Well, I don't want to be on any sea during any storm, frankly, but I'm a land lover, as you say.
A land lubber?
Well, I've heard it both ways.
No. No.
Yeah. So, no, I wouldn't want to be on the Bering,
Storms can be fun.
I have seen videos of, I think a storm in the North Sea, or sailors in the North Sea having to deal with the waters, the really rolling waves and everything,
Mm-hmm.
and the camera is stationary relative to the ship, and so everything looks still because everything's battened down, but the guys are just kind of flying everywhere, and it is so freaking funny, and you can tell they're used to it. They're just like trying to do their best, but it's awesome.
Well, I'll tell you what, whenever we got a little bit of motion on the boat, because I was on an aircraft carrier,
Oh,
a lot of times you don't feel the ocean at all, just because of
the massive
sea, the massive size of this thing.
Mm-hmm.
So anytime we had in rough enough seas to where we actually got some listing, some rocking and rolling, it was fun. It was great.
That's cool.
Especially if you're able to be in your rack at that time, you just get rocked to sleep.
Oh, that sounds comforting.
But no, we'd be doing unrep, and we're going just no motion whatsoever. We're just going out, doing our thing. We got a destroyer right next to us. Now the destroyer, on the other hand, is just going up and down,
right.
up, and I mean massive, up and down,
Ooh.
and rolling, and it's so funny seeing us just not moving, other than our forward direction, and the destroyer next to us just like going crazy.
Man, that's cool.
Okay, so let's see. So the naval operations officially ended on October 5th when the last American warship headed south for Mare Island. They had patrolled in total 6 nautical miles since June 22nd. British forces sailed back to the East Asian coast, and the owners of 41 vessels protested and demanded compensation for the breaking up of their sealing activities.
So let me get this straight. They're sealing, and they were warned not to do so by the Americans, and then presumably the British, who have dominion over Canada, I think, at this point, and they're complaining that we're interfering. This is 1892, you said?
1891.
1891? Okay.
Yeah, 1891.
I can only imagine. When was Alaska purchased? It was 1850s, I think, because it was Seward that did it.
Alaska was purchased in 1867 when the Russian Empire transferred Alaska to the U.S. for $7.2 million.
Wow.
Which is an equivalent of $129 million today.
Dang. That was a good deal. Good job. So I imagine...
Yeah. I mean, it gave us 584,000 square miles.
Mm-hmm.
That's a lot.
And oil, as it turns out. And seals. Perhaps the greatest natural resource.
Yeah.
So I'm just trying to get the context of the timeline of when Alaska became American, because maybe they went into Russia all the time, Russian Alaska, and just took their seals, and Russia's like, that's too far away.
Yeah. Well, it's really not, though. There's one portion of Russia and Alaska are very close together.
Well, I'm guessing like from Moscow. Well, I guess it's still far from Washington, D.C. Maybe the Russians had their own issues, and it's like, look, seals over there are not as big of a deal as, I guess, the impending Japanese-Russian war.
Well, tell you what, you go find the Alaska History podcast, and you can find the answers for us.
Okay. Sorry, man. Let's talk about Navy stuff.
But yeah, that's the Bering Sea anti-poaching operations.
That's very cool. So at this time, what would become the Coast Guard is under the direction of the Navy?
Of the U.S. government.
Okay, so it's independent then of the Navy?
Yeah.
Okay.
They're independent.
Okay.
All right. So I think we're going to end that here. So I need to find a new hero. Let's see. So at the end of all of our episodes, we like to honor one of our fallen angels with the help of HeroCards.us. And today we're going to honor Lieutenant Albert Leroy David. His hometown was Maryville, Missouri. He served on the USS Pillsbury, DE-133. He received the Medal of Honor, the Navy Cross with Gold Star. His date of sacrifice was September 17th, 1945, in Norfolk, Virginia. He was 43 years old. So Lieutenant Albert David was awarded the Medal of Honor for his courage in leading a boarding party onto a German U-boat, the first capture of an enemy warship on the high seas in 130 years. The confiscated technology, maps, and plans helped Allied forces combat the German U-boat menace in World War II's Atlantic Theater. Born in Maryville, Missouri, Albert Leroy David enlisted in the United States Navy at Kansas City, Missouri on September 30th, 1919 at the age of 17. According to the Naval History and Heritage Command, he completed basic training at Naval Training Station San Francisco, California, and received orders to serve on the battleship USS Arkansas, BB-33. For 2 decades, David served on numerous ships across the U.S. fleet, including the USS Rochester, CA-124, the USS Preston, DD-379, the USS Delaware, BB-28, the USS Utah, BB-31, the USS Texas, BB-35, the USS Trenton, CL-11, USS Cincinnati, CL-6, the USS Salt Lake City, CA-25, wow, and the USS Dobbin, AD-3. After 20 years of Navy service, Lieutenant David was placed on Fleet Reserve. Within a month, on September 1st, 1939, Nazi Germany invaded Poland and plunged Europe into World War II. Although the United States had no official declaration of war, preparations were underway, and Lieutenant David was recalled to active duty. The U.S. Department of Defense recounts, David spent the next few years working stateside and received 3 promotions. By May of 1943, he was a lieutenant junior grade with orders to help outfit and serve on the newly commissioned USS Pillsbury, DD-133, a destroyer that escorted Atlantic Ocean convoys into Casablanca, Morocco, and Gibraltar. The ship also served as part of a hunter-killer task force formed around the USS Guadalcanal, CVE-60. As a lieutenant junior grade, Albert David was serving as Pillsbury's assistant engineering and electrical officer with the task force when they used sonar technology, located a German submarine about 150 miles off the coast of Cape Blanco, which is a peninsula in the North Atlantic on the border of Mauritania and West Sahara in Western Africa. One of the task force ships launched depth charges to disable the enemy sub. With its rudders damaged and compartments beginning to flood, the sub, identified as German U-boat U-505, was forced to surface. The German commander ordered the crew to set demolition charges and scuttle the vessel to keep it out of enemy hands, and then abandon ship. The fast action of Lieutenant David and a team of 9 from Pillsbury is recounted in David's Medal of Honor citation, which reads as follows. The President of the United States of America, in the name of Congress, takes pride in presenting the Medal of Honor posthumously to then Lieutenant Junior Grade, Albert Leroy David, United States Navy, for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty while attached to the USS Pillsbury DE-133 during the capture of an enemy German submarine off French West Africa, June 4th, 1944, taking a vigorous part in the skillfully coordinated attack on the German U-505, which climaxed a prolonged search by the task group. Lieutenant David boldly led a party from the Pillsbury in boarding the hostile submarine as it circled erratically at 5 or 6 knots on the surface. Fully aware that the U-boat might momentarily sink or be blown up by exploding demolition and scuttling charges, he braved the added danger of enemy gunfire to plunge the conning tower hatch and, with his small party, exerted every effort to keep the ship afloat and to assist the succeeding and more fully equipped salvage parties making the U-505 seaworthy for the long tow across the Atlantic to a U.S. port. By his valiant service during the first successful boarding and capture of an enemy man-of-war on the high seas by the U.S. Navy since 1815, wow, Lieutenant David contributed materially to the effectiveness of our Battle of the Atlantic and upheld the highest traditions of the U.S. Naval Service. The high value to the Allies in capturing the German U-boat cannot be overstated. U-505 had sunk 8 Allied ships before its capture. The sub was equipped with the latest German technology in radar, torpedoes, radio code, and other advanced systems. Other valuable finds included charts, code books, classified materials, the Enigma decoding machines, and even notebooks containing decrypted messages. After towing the crippled submarine to the United States, it provided a treasure trove of intelligence that helped American and Allied forces combat the German U-boat threat throughout the Atlantic theater. U-505 was the first enemy captured at sea by the U.S. Navy since the War of 1812, 130 years earlier. The U.S. Department of Defense says, quote, "The confiscated materials also allowed the Allies to continue decoding German submarine radio messages in real time, which led to greater success in the European theater." While Lieutenant David's actions earned him the Congressional Medal of Honor, he would not live to receive the reward. He died of a heart attack on September 17, 1945 in Norfolk, Virginia, less than a month before the ceremony that would honor him with the nation's highest military award of valor. His widow, Linda May David, was presented his medal by President Harry S. Truman on October 5, 1945, in a ceremony at the White House. Lieutenant Albert Leroy David was laid to rest in Fort Rosecrans National Cemetery in San Diego, California. On October 19, 1964, the U.S. Navy launched the destroyer USS Albert David, FF-1050, named in his honor. Following the war, U-boat U-050 was sent to Chicago's Museum of Science and Industry, where it was restored and designated a National Historic Landmark in 1989. The exhibit includes Lieutenant Albert Leroy David's Medal of Honor. So, Lieutenant Albert Leroy David, we thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, XO.
Yo.
If you want to learn more about U-boat U-505, we have an episode about U-boat 505.
That's exactly what I was going to say. I was like, oh, yeah, we have an episode all about that. So that's very cool.
We do. And that episode came about because I visited U-505.
It was in Chicago, right?
She is in Chicago in the Museum of Science and Industry in the basement.
Nice. Yeah.
So, go see it. All right, so take us out.
Oh, yeah, okay. Thank you very much, listeners. It's really nice to get together and talk about these things and understand what may have led to our modern world with the events of the past. And so thank you for taking this journey with us. If you want to contact us, there's a couple of different ways to do that. You can email us, and the email address is usnavyhistorypodcast@gmail.com. We're also on X or Twitter. Handle is @USNHistoryPod. You can tweet us there. We also have a Discord server. We'd love for you to join us and interact. You can post photos or stories, or maybe you have a video of when the seas were rolling and you want to show us and everybody else what that was all about. We would love to see it. Also on YouTube, if you'd like to give us a listen there, and regardless of what platform you are, but specifically if you're on iTunes or YouTube or even Spotify, well, just please rate us. That helps us get the word out about what we're doing, and more people will find us. And so thank you very much for everything, and we will see you next time.
And with that, we're going to wish you guys fair winds and following seas. Bye.
Goodbye.